Hello everyone, I'm Matt and welcome back to the Amateur Writing Expert. Today we're going to be talking about plot. How do you construct a plot for your story? Well, this is interesting because there are two types of writers out there and they fall into different categories when it comes to plot. There are discovery writers and then there are outline writers. Now, a discovery writer, also known as a pantser, is someone who sits down to write a story and they create and have an interesting idea or interesting characters, and then they write a story from that idea. They don't have an idea about where their story is going necessarily. They just create a character or create an interesting world, and then they write interesting characters, seed ideas, and then they discover what is going on in the story. They just write the story, seeing where the plot will take the characters and how the characters will react to the plot. This is where the term pantser comes in because they're flying by the seat of their pants, or discovery writers because they're discovering the story as they write it. And then there are outline writers. Outline writers, also known as architects, are writers who, when they sit down to write a story, will do way better if they sit down and ask themselves, okay, where is my story going? Who are my characters? What is my character's emotional journey going to be? How am I going to get from point A to point B? So, there are two different classes of writers, and both are very different from each other. But it's important that you know this stuff that we're going to talk about in this video, because even if you're a discovery writer who writes and just kind of goes with the flow, you need this stuff when it comes to writing the revisions. A lot of times, a discovery written story could feel sloppy because the discovery writer hasn't gone through the story with a fine-tooth comb and made sure that they refined the story to make logical sense for someone reading it. So, even if you discovery write something, you're going to find that these tips are helpful because they'll be helpful in your revision process. And if you're an outline writer like me, this is going to be helpful for you as you sit down and you actually start working on the story. So, here are 6 tips in how to write your story's theme. And, my apologies, there's actually 7 tips. I misread there. I started out with 6 and then ended up with 7 when making the outline for this video. Guess which writing camp I fall into. So, tip number 1, find your story's theme. And this isn't some mystic find your story's soul thing. Every story has a theme, and that theme is established by your story's truth and your story's lie. And this is important because every story has a truth, has a theme, and has a truth. Even the ones that claim that there is no truth, because the claim that there is no truth is the truth that you are attempting to teach your reader. So, existential questions aside about truth and the nature of truth, every story is going to have a truth in it, whether you're a Christian writer or whether you are an atheist writer. So, typically, this truth is going to be what your protagonist learns during their emotional journey through the story. So, your story's theme is going to encompass your story's truth. Theme is a little different than truth, but it's going to encompass your story's truth. Your story's theme is going to start with the lie that the protagonist believes at the start of the story, and the truth that the protagonist that learns by the end of the story. And it's important for you to answer this question because understanding your story's theme will help you narrow down and focus on what you are writing in the story. It's going to help you in making your story focused and not being sidetracked by too many interesting subplots, which is very easy to do. Tip number 2, find your logline or create your logline. What is a logline? Well, I only recently discovered this storytelling device, but a logline is a one-sentence summary of your story. I'm not going to quote this perfectly, but from the screenwriting book called Save the Cat, which is where I've learned this term of the logline, Die Hard's logline is a police officer comes to LA to see his wife, and her office building is taken over by terrorists. Pretty basic logline. Now, obviously, that's not going to encompass the entirety of the story, and the more complex your story, the more plots that your logline is going to leave out. For example, a logline for, say, the Hunger Games. A teenage girl volunteers for the gladiator games in place of her sister. Lord of the Rings. A unlikely hero has to destroy the weapon of the Dark Lord. Gregor the Overlander. A young boy and his sister fall into a underground world and have to rescue their long lost father. Again, these are gross exaggerations of what the plot actually is, but the strength of the logline is that you then have a handle or something to hold on to of where your story is going and what your story is about. Even if it's very similar to theme, but it's also a little different than theme because the theme is more like your protagonist's emotional journey, whereas your logline might be a little bit more about, say, the plot of the story. For example, the theme in Gregor the Overlander is him learning to overcome fear. Whereas the logline of Gregor the Overlander is a lot different from that. It's the story of a young boy and his sister who fall into an underground world and have to rescue their father who's been lost for several years. Very different kind of presentation. And of course, the logline doesn't encompass everything. Lord of the Rings is more complicated than the logline will present, but your logline will help you remember what is the most important plot of your story. This is what helps you establish your story's promise. One of the best writing resources I've used is the Brandon Sanderson videos. If you've been watching these videos for a while, you know I reference him a lot. And in his video, Sanderson references that every story has a promise, progress, and a payoff. Your logline helps you establish your story's main promise that you are going to be focusing on, and where the reader is going to get the most feeling of fulfillment and motion going through the story. Tip number 3, craft your characters. A lot of times when writing goes wrong, it's because the characters instead of moving the plot forward, they are being moved by the plot. So this is a very easy thing to do, especially for discovery writers. But basically, you don't have a firm idea of who your characters are. So you change their personality to help you move your plot along as you would like to have it happen. But here's the thing. Characters are supposed to be like real people. And yes, while we are, as human beings, inconsistent, we tend to be inconsistent in more or less consistent ways. And if your character is not being consistent, your reader is not going to like that character. So you want to, before you write a story, ask yourself, who are your characters? Make a firm outline for them in your mind, or at least a firm seed of who they are in their mind before you start writing. And even though I'm an outline writer, I do highly recommend this for discovery writers as well, because if a character is non-combative and then becomes very combative in the story just because you need an argument, that's kind of inconsistent, and you either need to have a reason for why this character who was very peaceful in the very beginning of your story is now combative, or you need to realize that, this character would not act that way in this situation. So make sure you have strong characters so that you know what they will do in the story. instead of them being moved by the plot, they will instead move the plot along. And that brings us to point number 4, which is name your plots. Next, after you create your characters, you want to identify the types of plots that you have in your story. This may seem interesting to some people, but every story has multiple plots, even very simple ones. So, for example, apologies, computer issues, but for example, in Beauty and the Beast, very simple plot, but it has multiple plots within that plot. There is the Beast's plot of becoming less spoiled, selfish, and unkind. There is the relationship dynamic plot between Belle and Beast, and then there is the villagers plot, the Gaston, LeFou, and Maurice and the villagers plot in the story. So a very simple story with multiple plots. Every story that is going to be of a novel-like length is going to have multiple plots in it. If you're writing a short story, you might be able to get away with just one, but whether you're writing a simple story that's only 20 or so chapters, or an epic fantasy, you are going to have multiple plots in your story. And it's important for you to identify what those plots are, so that you aren't at the beck and call of whatever plots kind of come into your head, and you have that way you can understand where the plots are going. And again, if you're doing this in revisions, this will help you refine the plots that are already there and help you triage them, help you answer the question of what are the most important plots in the story. Because there might be lots of plots in your story, but it's important to answer the question of what are the most important plots of the story? Which are the ones I want the reader to remember the most? And dwell on those ones. Spend more time refining those ones, and spend more time on those ones in your story. Because those are the plots that your readers are going to be most interested in and want you to be showing the most forward progress in. Tip number 5, plot out your plots. Once you identify your plots, ask yourself, how can I show progress in these plots? How do they move, and how does their progress manifest themselves? This is where it can be really helpful to watch different movies that have similar plots or themes as the ones you want in your story, and so that you can, once you watch these movies, you can ask yourself, what type of progress is going to be shown in my story? Watching these movies that have similar plots and themes can help you in crafting your own plots. They can help answer the question of, how do I signpost progress in a romance plotline? How do I signpost progress in a mentor-apprentice plotline? How do I signpost progress in a travel log? How do I signpost progress in a action adventure story? How do I signpost progress in a heist story, or a thriller story, or a science fiction story like Jurassic Park, where there's a kind of science gone wrong plotline? There are lots of different ways that you plot lines out there, and analyzing them can help you answer the question of how you make the progress going forward. I'm not going to be able to go into all of them in depth, but an example of progress in a mentor-apprentice story might be the progress of the mentor and the apprentice becoming closer friends throughout the story, their closer bond growing, and also the apprentice's ability to learn, their apprentice's accumulation of new skills, and the mentor's ability to kind of grow as a teacher throughout the story. Travelogue is kind of easy because you have the progression on a map, and you just want to make sure that the progression on the map is something that is making sense to your reader and not going to frustrate them if they are going on too many long side quests. So having the idea of what your plots are and the progress that you're taking, the steps you're taking in that progress, will help you in plotting out your plots. And I will recommend that if there's any plot in your story that you are not as innately good at writing, taking extra time to plot out that plot. I personally struggle more with plots that are not action based, so it's helpful for me to think what is the character's internal journey plot and plot that out, and in more depth than, say, the action sequences in my book. Okay, tip number 6, use as many or as few bullet points as you need. Your outline should help to force you to assess the points of progress in your story without robbing you of the joy of your writing. This, again, is going to be referencing more to the people who are outlining beforehand when you write a story, rather than the people who are doing the revisions after the fact. But some outliners will enjoy writing more if they have every little detail lined out, while others will need less bullet points so they aren't crippled by trying to hit all the little marks that they set along the way for their story. You want to use as many bullet points in your outlining or in your revision process as you need to help you write your story without losing the joy of writing your story. Final tip number 7, be mindful of your promise, your progress, and your payoff. Now, you might actually want to start with the payoff in your story, but this is kind of an important thing for you to remember in your story. Focusing mostly on payoff, though, your payoff is the fulfillment of the story theme and the plot of your story. So payoff is where you fulfill the plot that you set out at the start of your story. And this is important to realize because a lot of times in stories there are very twisty plots. But twisty plots are not always better plots. Examining the different types of plots out there, to use Sanderson examples, there are 3 types of plots. Toy car and toy car, or these are payoffs, I should say. Toy car to toy car, toy car to real car, and toy car to toy plane. The toy car to toy car plotline is the type of plotline where you promise something to your reader at the start of the story. You then make progress towards towards the promise that you set out at the start of the story, and then as a payoff, you give your reader a toy car at the end of the story. You give the reader exactly what they expected in the story. Classic example of this is, of course, going to be the classic example of this is going to be the romance plots in stories. We're not necessarily thinking all the time that in a romance plot, the characters aren't going to end up together. Beauty and the Beast. The promise at the beginning of the story is Belle and Beast are going to end up together. He's going to be, his curse is going to be removed, and they are going to live happily ever after. We're not unhappy when that plot is fulfilled, because we were promised it at the beginning, and we received that promise at the very end. At the very end. And that can be a really satisfying ending. The next type of promise is the toy car to real car. This is where you promise your son you're going to get him a toy. You promise your reader, I should say, that you are going to give them a toy car. You make progress in the story as they're getting toward getting a toy car. Then you find out that they not only get a toy car, they actually get a real functioning car. This is kind of an example of what you would call an expanding plot, where it's kind of like akin to what Sanderson uses to describe Star Wars, where the plot is Luke is promised that he's going to go out there and have an adventure, and that he will restore the plans to the rebels about how to destroy the Death Star. But then the payoff is he helps in destroying the Death Star. So that's a example of a toy car to real car promise. Finally, there's the toy car to toy plane promise, which is you promise your readers that they're going to get a toy car, but then you through the story start showing that a toy car is maybe not the best option. You instead would want a toy plane, and then at the end of the story, you get a toy plane. Great example of this, even though I don't like the quality of the movie so much, is the first Tobey Maguire movie. With the first of which, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. So the reason that this story kind of works is because Tobey Maguire thinks he wants to have MJ. That's his overall goal. But then throughout the story, he learns that he doesn't want he. It's not the most important thing to be the cool kid. It's not the most important thing to get the girl. It's not the most important thing to get lots of money. What the most important thing is for him to do the right thing. With great power comes great responsibility. And so for him, it's the realization of he needs to let go of the thing that he wanted at the start of the story. Another example of this would be How to Train Your Dragon 3, which obviously it makes a lot of people sad, but the promise of the story is Hiccup, I should say, wants to keep the dragons with him in Berk. And the story progresses for him to realize that it's not the right thing for him to keep the dragons with him in Berk. He needs to let all the dragons go and to their hidden world, even if that means letting go of his best friend. And honestly, that is a cry-worthy scene. And it should be. So, sometimes when you are doing these payoffs, you want to give your protagonist what they want at the start of the story. But then, in some stories, you're going to want to not give the protagonist what they wanted at the start of the story. Or you're going to want to give the protagonist something that they want, but they have been changed and they are sad, even though they have technically gotten what they want. But they have a degree of peace because they did the right thing, even though it has changed and harmed them throughout the story. Good example of this being The Hunger Games, where the end game of the story is that Katniss doesn't get everything she wants. She doesn't get to protect all the people that she wants to have protected, but she, in some ways, is able to wrestle through and come to the sense of peace in that she did what was right, and she's able to find a new equilibrium in that. I guess there's actually a point number 8, which is, remember, you want to keep an eye on the progress and the promises that you are making. Because oftentimes, you may know in your head what the payoff may be, but you may have forgotten, am I making progress towards that? Using a good example of this, if in Oathbringer, the third Stormlight book, written by Brandon Sanderson, he initially had issues with his beta readers because he promised that the characters were going to go to a certain place on the map, but then they kept getting side quested because he knew they needed to go somewhere else, and he had it be that they went somewhere else, but the readers didn't feel like they were being fulfilled because they were feeling like they were going on a diversion because they were expecting that the characters were needing to go to another place, but instead they end up in a place that's completely different. So, the way that Sanderson fixed this in his story was that he tweaked his promises a little bit. So that instead of having it be that the characters all were like, we're going to go to this one place, he had one character who said, I've had a vision. We actually need to go over here. And that helped to sell the readers on the idea that maybe it's not the best idea for them to go over here. So, it's important while you're writing your story, ask yourself, am I making progress toward my promises? Being mindful of what are my promises? And it might even be helpful for you to write these down on a note document and look at that as you are writing so that you have a sense of where you're going and are able to chart your motion in moving toward that end goal, or, if you'll pardon my expression, that end game. Well, that is all that I have for today. I hope you found this video enjoyable. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe and leave a comment below about any other videos that you would like me to discuss, videos, any other writing topics that you would like for me to discuss. If you are new to the channel, I'm glad that you found me. I am not a professional writer, but I love writing and I'm working on stories right now. I actually am working on a story idea right now and I'm hoping to publish by the end of this year. So, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you were able to find some helpful tidbits in this video, and I hope you have a great day, and God bless.